When I suggested the title of What Has Lockdown Taught Us About Digital Nature and Wellbeing, I thought it would be easy, but actually it turned into something of a nightmare trying to assess exactly what the answer is to that question. So this is a bit of a whistle-stop tour through some of the research and thinking I've been doing, but it's by no means the answer to this question. So let's just see where it takes us. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts and your experiences as well in the Q&A. So the first slide I wanted to show you is this. I used to show this slide in my presentations because it was funny. That was way before COVID. Now it doesn't, I think, make us laugh quite so much. I always used to say, if you want to get out into nature, why not hold outdoor meetings? So I've been writing about this topic for a long time, and just to give you an idea, the book Hello World Travels in Virtuality, that came out in 2004, and that was about my own experience of traveling in cyberspace and finding it very much, it felt like landscapes, it felt like the real world, if you like. And I began to wonder whether other people felt the same as I did. So I started researching that question, and particularly the idea of metaphors of nature and landscape in cyberspace. And 8 years later, I finally got something of an answer and wrote Technobiophilia, Nature and Cyberspace. And that was the book that we celebrated the launch of at Café Sci in 2013. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. And then out of Technobiophilia, which was quite a kind of heavy research tome, I produced Nature and Wellbeing in the Digital Age, which is more of a practical guide with a kind of brief summary of the conclusions of Technobiophilia, and also an emphasis on practicality and how you can, as it says here, take care of yourself online and offline. So I just want to preface this by saying that it takes long presentations to get through the history of my research in Technobiophilia, and I don't have time for that today. So I hope you'll take this as a given. And perhaps watch my other presentations on my website if you want more detail about that. So in this summary, I found in my research that obviously nature is good for us. It's something that we've always known. But in the 1980s, particularly, there was a lot of research in environmental psychology to try and prove it. And they did. There were many research projects looking at how being out in nature can affect us, our heart rate, our blood pressure, our levels of stress, our ability to concentrate, and all of these things were researched and measured. And even psychological connectedness to nature can produce the same effect. So you don't have to be out in nature to gain some of these benefits. And one thing that I noticed was that while my emphasis was on screens, actually much of these researchers' emphasis was on screens too, because many of the projects that they did involved looking at nature on a video or a picture of nature. And at that time, very few people were actually looking at the impact of nature on screens. But it seemed to me that a TV is as good as a computer screen. So what they learned in that research, I thought could be applied to experiencing nature in cyberspace and on our computers. During that time, it was in 1984, there was a great deal of talk about biophilia. E.O. Wilson is an eminent biologist, and he came up with this term. Biophilia had been used by other people before, but he was the one who attached this definition to it. He said that biophilia is the innate attraction to life and lifelike processes. And the innate attraction comes from the fact that he believed that there may be a genetic basis for our attraction to life. He also thought, although this hasn't been proved, I don't think, that biophilia can lie dormant for periods of time until something triggers it into action again. And it's quite interesting to think about whether that has happened during the COVID lockdown, that our kind of, well, we were instructed, weren't we, to go out into nature, that contact or renewed contact might have triggered biophilia in many people who hadn't really given it much thought before. So if you hear the term biophilia, if it's new to you, you'll understand now that it's that sense of wanting to be in nature. We often say, if you feel a bit stressed, you might say to somebody, oh, I need to get back to nature for a bit. And they understand what you mean, but people seldom actually put it into words, as it were. They don't need to, but that's biophilia. So my research, which, as I say, took 8 years of talking to a lot of people, traveling, reading a lot of studies, was that what I was dealing with was what I decided to call technobiophilia, which is a chunky name, but I'm afraid I couldn't think of anything better. And technobiophilia, I defined using E.O. Wilson's definition as the innate attraction to life and lifelike processes as they appear in technology. And as in this lovely picture that you can see of somebody with a waterfall pouring out of their phone. Obviously, that's not technically possible, but many people do have these kinds of images on their screens. And when I'm giving this talk to a live audience, I nearly always ask people to put their hand up if they have a picture of nature on their phone wallpaper or their desktop wallpaper. And there's always over 50% of people in the audience do. These are intuitive choices. They don't think, oh, I need to put a picture of nature on my phone to make me feel better. They just intuitively choose that that's what they would like to see. So technobiophilia connects our lives in nature with our lives in the digital. So that's where I was with my research when COVID hit. And all of a sudden, March 2020, we were only allowed to go out once a day. And we were instructed to take a walk. That's what we were all expected to do. And everybody started looking for the nearest and best place to take a walk. Well, what I did was walk down to the beach. I live in Boscombe in Bournemouth, very close to the beach. And early every morning, I would, about 7 o'clock in the morning, I would tie a scarf around my nose and mouth and walk down to the beach there and do some exercises there. And this was the sign that I saw every morning when I walked down to the beach. At the same time, people were starting to watch nature on TV. And when I was looking for evidence of this, there was so much material, it was hard to know where to start. But I picked this. Nature documentaries are perfect lockdown viewing, and they make people happier, October last year. Because it interested me that it says it highlighted the story of the last 2 northern white rhinos, but also included happier tales. And that's what people wanted. And this was said over and over again. I want to see positive programs about animals and nature. I must admit, I got hooked on zoo programs for a while. But there are other kinds of online wildlife shows too, which we've all experienced on Zoom. Some of you may have come across this drama last year at the meeting of Handforth Parish Council. On Zoom, people are revealed to be very different perhaps than they are at work or in council meetings. And so Zoom did become a bit like an online wildlife show. And if you think back, it's amazing how we've adapted to relating to each other online like this, and all the different protocols that we've put together to be able to communicate on Zoom. I find it quite fascinating that we've all slipped into that virtual world. It was hard at first, but now everybody's really used to it. Nature on Instagram became really big in 2020, and the RSPB set up Breakfast Birdwatch on Instagram. And here's one of the pictures that I picked out, Sussex Sarah. She seems to be quite near the top of favourite images. I can't imagine why, but she certainly stands out. And she writes, is anyone else feeling in a state of suspended animation these days? Living alone, the only tangible sense I have of days passing are the changes in nature as our lives are put on hold. So she, like thousands of others, perhaps millions across the world, was taking photographs of nature and posting them and talking about them. We were also very keen to watch live nature online. And I was interested to see that Country Life magazine, which is an English magazine generally about the hunting, shooting, fishing folks, was suddenly interested in animal webcams. And they listed, I think actually it was 10 or 20 top live webcams, but there was no space here for the slides. So these are their 3 top webcams to watch. Little penguins, sheep's, goats and newborn lambs, and this rather cute panda at Edinburgh Zoo. So people were dipping into nature online in lots of different ways. Nature sounds. The BBC has got their massive audio archive, and they were already working on a project called Soundscapes for Wellbeing, which was a large, complicated project with lots of different angles to it and lots of different programs connected to it. And I think quite late in the day, possibly, the University of Exeter inserted the virtual nature experiment, exploring how virtual experiences of nature might impact well-being. They haven't reported all of the results yet. I think it took place, I think it was January, February this year, something like that. So they're still looking at the data. But I thought this was very interesting. They had nearly 9,000 participants. But beyond those people, they say, we also heard from hundreds of people who wanted to share their own digital nature experiences, listening to birdsong on the radio or tuning into Winterwatch on the TV. And Alex Smalley of the University of Exeter, who ran this project, I thought it was interesting that he said many reflected on how important these digital forms of nature have been during lockdown. One interesting synchronicity was that you might be familiar with the game Animal Crossing that's been around for quite a few years now. But as it happens, it was relaunched last March 2020, the same month that COVID really hit the Western world. And so that was interesting that lots of people went online into this virtual world and played the game. So Slate magazine said animal crossers new and old found comfort in exerting control over their island's virtual terrain as the world outside grew more and more chaotic. And even the MIT Technology Review had something to say. Gentle, comforting games like Nintendo's latest hit are perfect escapist entertainment, but they're also helping us to connect in these strange times. So how did lockdown change our relationship? Well, the Office for National Surveys, ONS, is regularly surveying how people feel about all kinds of aspects of the lockdown. And these results are from February 2021 about the importance of natural spaces during the pandemic. And they concluded that local green and natural spaces have been important for well-being throughout the pandemic. And you can see from this chart that 41% of the people surveyed found visiting local green and natural spaces even more important than before. 38% found nature and wildlife more important than ever. Visiting local green and natural spaces more, 33%. And people noticing less wildlife than usual, 8%. I'm not quite sure where that fits in. Excuse me. This is not about digital. This is about actually being outside in analog nature. But interesting, it's being watched there's a lot of interest in the rising attraction to nature, and a lot of people wondering if it's going to continue. This is a bit of research that actually was published in 2020, but would have been done before COVID, into nature connecting us. And I thought this was very interesting, that this research reported a significant increase of feelings of connectedness to the community after watching digital nature. Now, this is a family picture, but they were actually looking more at the whole community. And I was particularly interested to see that they said, furthermore, tended nature scenes elicited more social aspirations than wild nature scenes. In other words, you might say that gardens and parks made people more community-minded or feeling more connected to the community than looking at wild nature. That's very interesting and could indicate some direction that we could go in after the pandemic. There's been a lot of gardeners collectives, a lot of communal gardening projects going on. Here in Bournemouth, we've had the Parks Foundation running a fantastic series of nature projects of all kinds. And perhaps that's the kind of thing that is really going to keep growing and keep people connected and contributing to the community. Another interesting study I came across, again from the University of Exeter, was a study that again began before COVID, about finding the best way to deliver virtual nature to improve mood. Now, what they were interested in was, what's the difference between watching nature on TV, on video, or in virtual reality? And their results were very interesting. You may have seen newspaper articles about this some time ago. They found that of those three, TV was the least effective, 360 video more effective, but virtual reality was top in terms of how much impact it had on people gaining benefits from nature. So it says here, I won't read all of these out, but virtual reality induced presence, a feeling of being there, and increased nature connectedness. And then it goes on to say that, of course, presence and nature connectedness mediated well-being benefits, and that these could have important implications for people in isolated, confined settings. I think this is fascinating. I don't have any research that I could find about virtual reality studies during COVID, but I'm sure that they're on the way, and we'll be seeing more about this, I think, in the next year or two. So during the pause, nature regenerated. By April 2020, only just a short time into it, CO2 and nitrogen dioxide had already fallen by up to 40%. Air traffic fell by 50%. Do you remember everybody was saying the sky's gone quiet? Road traffic fell 70%. I didn't drive my car for 2 or 3 months at least. And wildlife came into our living spaces. These wild goats usually live on the edges of Llandudno in Wales, but they ventured into the town during lockdown when the streets were quiet. There were coyotes on the Golden Gate Bridge. Deer ventured into Washington, D.C. And in Spain and Italy, wild boar were rambling everywhere. And everybody reported hearing more birds. The seas became quieter. Marine noise pollution greatly decreased. And I was interested in this quote from The Guardian saying how much since the Industrial Revolution, since we started using, vehicles, if you like, engineered vehicles on the sea instead of just human power, and plus all of the different kinds of machinery that we use in the sea, it has made the seas very noisy and thus very difficult for underwater creatures to communicate with each other. And that stopped, and that probably had quite an impact on the creatures of the sea. Again, too soon to see the results of that. So what has lockdown taught us about digital nature and well-being? I made this little tableau of my computer surrounded by plants as a suggestion to people who couldn't stand being on Zoom a minute longer, that they could create their own desk garden, so that when they're on Zoom, the people that they're with can't see these plants, but they can, and they can enjoy looking at their house plants and touching them and generally looking after them while being on a Zoom call at the same time. And since these activities are supposed to reduce stress, be found to reduce stress, then that might be a positive way to get through a Zoom call. And you might notice in the corner there's a little wooden mouse, because again, the feel of a natural material rather than, say, a plastic mouse is beneficial. So if you're conscious and aware, you can change your environment in lots of ways. So lockdown has taught us that we can connect with nature in lots of different ways, physical and digital, and many of us have done both over the last year. We can live more of our lives outdoors. When we had to, we learned how to take walks in the rain with friends, how to have a cup of tea outside in whatever shelter you could find, generally how to meet people, how to do all kinds of activities that we really couldn't be bothered or hadn't thought of doing before. And lockdown has also shown us that nature can help connect our communities in the way I was mentioning earlier. Lots of people forced to find ways to do things outdoors actually were often really successful. But, and this is the darker message, individual nature connection is not enough. If you look at these slides on the right, somebody who watched A Life on Our Planet and was spurred on with key messages to decrease consumption of meat and dairy, waste less, I need to do more, I need to do better. Lots of people felt that after watching that film, A Life on Our Planet, which I'll mention again in a minute. And here we have the picture again of the woman with her arms open to nature, embracing it, wanting to gain all the benefits. This is a very kind of personal, individualized reaction. But at the same time, lots of people are watching Seaspiracy, a Netflix documentary about what's going on in terms of mass fishing and the way that the oceans and life in the oceans is being hugely reduced by the companies who we seem to have no control over in terms of trawling the seas. And then, of course, again, just very recently, Canada in flames. There's a town there called Lytton, which I believe was burned to the ground last week. All of this stuff is happening all the time, and just feeling connected to nature is not enough. And it's got me thinking, COVID has taught some of us anyway to connect better with nature. But has that process also, by calming us down and de-stressing us, has it also sedated us? Has it distracted us? Has it separated us even more from what else is happening in the world? After all, look at the vaccine, the way the vaccines are being distributed. You can see from this picture here that the very palest blue are the people who have had virtually no vaccines given to them. And all the richer countries are fine and they're hanging on to much more than they need. So the Director General of the World Health Organization in January this year said, the world is on the brink of a catastrophic moral failure, and the price of this failure will be paid with lives and livelihoods in the world's poorest countries. In the news last week, Bangladesh, the climate emergency has caused rising sea levels to threaten these villages. Some of them have had to move home up to 5 times because their homes are just constantly being washed away. Some of the homes are 6 feet in the air. They've been raised so high to escape the floods, which just go on and on and on. I don't know whether these people have been vaccinated, but I did check, and vaccinations just started coming into Bangladesh very slowly in February, March. But this is a catastrophic moral failure, not just in terms of vaccines, but in terms of climate emergency. So going back to a life on our planet, and I'm just coming to the end now, Sir David Attenborough delivers his witness statement and tells the story of our greatest mistake. And the film begins and ends in Chernobyl. This is a classroom wall you can see behind him, which, although still devoid of humans, has seen the return of many thriving animals and plants. It is a place where, when left alone by humans, has actually begun to thrive. And David Attenborough is saying we have the opportunity to become a species in balance with nature. So, future research, what's the role of technobiophilia now? It began as an idea that was contradictory, even harmful, probably silly. But the last 18 months have shown the benefits of nature in the digital world. And now I believe digital nature can play a part in helping humanity to finally become a species in balance with nature. If at all possible, that's what we need to be doing now. Thank you. And now I'm going to hand over to Dr. Hiroko Oe, who is going to give you a Japanese perspective on what I've just been speaking about.
Okay. Thank you, Sue. So perhaps just briefly to follow up Sue's presentation, which was very inspiring. Thank you very much again. So just briefly, I would like to talk about the Japanese situation and also our business school. I'm from the business school of Bournemouth University. So just briefly, I would like to introduce our future perspective of the relevant research. First of all, Japan did not lock down in the strict sense of the word when COVID came in, because this is because there are no legal regulatory measures in place to restrict the citizens' rights to move around and go out and shop and bits and pieces. But this means that the public sector can only ask the citizens to cooperate. So just to keep that some kind of physical distances and don't go out and wear masks anyway. So Japanese people, Asian people are very familiar with the wearing surgical masks anyway. But this means so that just the public sector has been asking them, the citizen, to cooperate. But the thing is, it is that the university students who were affected the most because universities and colleges are just completely moved to the online teaching. So the university students, usually in Japan, the new term starts in April. So almost 2 years, the young students couldn't meet up their new classmates. Then what are they doing? I have found out that the 3 main activities among the Japanese youngsters recently. The first, Zoom party, drinking party over the Zoom. Second, online gaming. Third, so online ebooks reading or YouTube watching, the Japanese animes, including the nature-related stories and cartoons. And it is very interesting to know that, because sort of as a side effect of the corona lockdown, youngsters are more conscientious, taking care of the nature, and that they are paying more attention to the nature. And also just now, as Sue said, interestingly, the younger generation is now more interested in connectedness with the communities and the neighbors, even in both the physical spaces or cyberspaces. This is a very interesting finding at the moment. And also regarding the anime, Japan is one of the most famous, well-known countries for its anime, but there are so many interesting masterpieces in the context of the nature. For example, Ghibli's Totoro is based on the very rural area and lots of greens and the scenery, nature you can see. And so based on these circumstances and taking these into our consideration, the BU research continues. First of all, let's feel entire nature through our senses. Maybe if we visit the real nature forest, of course, we can use our nose and all of the 5 senses. Maybe it is a little bit restricted if we just enjoy the digital nature, but still, there are lots of evidence that people can be happier, people can feel that much healthier just by watching the nice picture of photos or digital videos online. And also, let's focus on the subject cognitive and awareness data. Sometimes medical doctors want to have a certain solid medical evidence, say hormone balance is improved, or maybe blood pressure is now much better, something like that. Of course, that the kind of a medical evidence is very helpful and useful. But at the same time, how we feel is also very, very important. So perhaps also the attachment to nature, behavior change towards environmental protection, and also respect to nature, that kind of perception change can be enhanced by the digital nature. So thank you very much. Just briefly, I just wanted to introduce some brief outline of the what we are doing, what the Japanese researchers are doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Hiroko. And now we go on to the next slide. Yes, Sharon?
Okay, thank you very much, both of you, for a really interesting talk. And I think it's obviously something that we've all been thinking about recently. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, and during that 5 minutes, have a think about any questions that have come to mind. And if you want to just pop them in the chat, so you can do that by just clicking on chat at the bottom of your screen. There's a little speech bubble, and then you can type in any questions that you've got there. And then what we'll do is we'll get into the discussion around those questions after the break. So we'll see everybody in about 5 minutes time. Thank you. I hope you all enjoyed the talk, and as I say, if you've got any questions, if you pop them in the chat for us just now, and we can start discussing them. First of all, there's a really lovely comment from Jill Hale, Sue, that it is around how she's got comfort from maintaining her late husband's garden and being able to share pictures of the garden. I think that's something that we've all tried to do, some sort of gardening that's sort of helped us keep us connected, haven't we?
Yes, and I think the sharing of pictures for those kinds of purposes is also something that is so widespread, we don't even really think about it. But certainly if anybody here is on Facebook or Instagram, you will see that people are constantly sharing photos of nature, usually feel good photos or photos of things they've grown and want to share. And I think that her story is particularly poignant, and it's amazing how connected we feel. I used to have, I don't have it now, but for many years, my parents had honeysuckle growing up around the cottage they lived in. And they gave me a cutting, and every time I moved house, I took the cutting with me until finally it ran out. But plants and pictures of plants can be really evocative of people that we know.
Yeah, I was proudly sharing pictures of my 1.5 meter high tomato plant that only produced 2 tomatoes on my windowsill.
Yes, I do actually have another project. I didn't share the photo today, but I've got a project for desk lettuce. And so for a while behind my laptop, I was growing a box of lettuce that I could see, but nobody else could, obviously on Zoom. And that made me feel very happy. And it was also useful for snacking.
Healthy snacking as well.
Healthy.
I was just most disappointed with the tomatoes my tomato plant produced. We've got a question from Helen Whitehead that's, does blue nature, water, have similar effects to green nature and trees, do you think?
Oh, hi Helen, long time no see. Yes, absolutely. And I mentioned the University of Exeter, and they seem to be leading the country, if not the world, in research into blue mind. And indeed, it has many similar characteristics, not just the oceans, but lakes, rivers. And it was very interesting, I thought, that when lockdown was eased last year, many of us in this chat probably live in Bournemouth. Bournemouth was descended upon by hordes of people who were just desperate to get to the sea, and rivers and lakes the same. And it really interested me, this almost, some people might say, animal urgency to get into the water or to just be near the water. It's incredibly powerful. So yes, the green or blue, different things for different states of mind, perhaps, but both equally powerful. Thanks for that question.
It was interesting because our sister cafe at Highcliffe, just down the road, they actually had a talk on blue nature a couple of months ago. So, you know, it's obviously an area that is, as you say, it's growing with people, and obviously everybody's interested in growing in nature anyway at the moment. So we've had one from Tim that's, what's the difference of the effects of digital created nature versus nature recordings? I'm wondering about the rhythmic nature of computer pseudo-random to complex interactive systems of nature.
Just to clarify, do you mean, when you say nature recordings, do you mean just an audio recording of the sounds of nature versus a computer generated audio? Is that what you mean? Yeah. I don't know. I haven't seen any research that compares them, but I know that there are many people who enjoy digitally produced computer generated sounds, which may or may not connect them with nature. But I can't really answer that question in any kind of expert detail, because it depends very much on the individual and how they receive it. I mean, I do know people who use natural sounds, like, for example, will play a recording of rain because it helps them concentrate and that kind of thing. And there might well be composers who are creating a digital version of the sound of rain, which could have the same effects. But to be honest, I can't really speak with any specialist knowledge about that question. Tim, do you have anything to say about it? Oh, maybe not.
I was going to say, I don't know. Are you able to unmute Tim and jump in?
Hi there.
Hi.
So on
Hi.
this, yeah, the pseudo randomness in computers is a problem for getting randomness created in software. So there's quite a rhythmic pattern to randomness in computers. So what I'm guessing it's to do more on the person, if they enjoy the rhythmic rather than the randomness of nature. But some people find the randomness quite tranquil, especially like sounds of rivers and everything.
That's interesting, because I would have thought nature has patterns rather than randomness. That your ear kind of tunes into the patterns, but I'd be interested to see what other people say about that. And I see Radio Lentos here. They might have a view.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, we've spent hours and hours, probably over 200 hours in the last year, listening to the soundscapes that we've recorded out in the wild. And the really interesting thing that we've observed about just listening to water moving is that it appears to have rhythm, but it actually doesn't. That's I find that very calming, just to listen, because your brain is looking for rhythms, but it never finds them.
And the same with the rain, isn't it? It kind of comes and goes, and it ebbs and flows, and it moves on different things, and so it's all unpredictable. And I think that's what kind of keeps us stimulated.
Thanks. That's really interesting. Audio always seems to get people talking. Should we check in, see if anybody else has any comments about audio? Oh, maybe not. Sorry, Sharon, I took that over. Go back to you.
No, it's your evening. It's interesting as well, though, because I found myself listening to a few of these, you know, on BBC Sounds and things like that, some of these sort of soundscapes and stuff. And it was fine up to a point, but every now and again, just as you were starting to drift off to sleep, they might introduce something that kind of woke you up again. And I think that's not very useful. So actually the sort of pseudo-random pattern would maybe be better for that sort of thing, and sort of lulling you into something rather than something coming out and blasting at you.
Some of our early episodes, we were kind of sharing ones from nighttime, and they're all quiet, and then a loud deer kind of barks, and so we had to start marking ones which had much more kind of monotonous sounds as sleep safe, so that the ones that had got those loud noise weren't being used for people to go to sleep to.
We've got enough to keep us awake and jumping in the middle of the night.
I find it quite interesting. I am at the moment in Chile, but I have been during lockdown in Peru. So whilst I was in lockdown, I started to listen a lot to sounds of, and it's an app which has like spring meadows, and these spring meadows are European spring meadows, and you can put in the bees and noise of water and whatever you want. And I think it comes with two things come together, the sound, plus when you're in lockdown and you're far away, the need to have something which is homely, or it's like the baking, or you know, the sounds which makes you feel safe, and suddenly you start to listen to these sounds which reminds you to the childhood or whatever. Yeah, so I think it's these kind of two dynamics, the sound of safety, of safe spaces, plus the kind of trying to remember beautiful nature.
You asked a question about whether the way people behave during COVID is culturally specific, and I thought Hiroko might want to talk to us about that. Hiroko, you're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, because of the bad Wi-Fi. Sorry about it. Could I please ask your question again, just in case?
Do you want to ask it, Thilo?
Yeah.
Yes, it's just if this relationship with nature and how we deal during COVID and to look for nature, want to be in nature, is culturally specific, or do you think it's kind of very generally everybody has that desire?
Thank you very much for asking. For example, have you ever heard of the word of forest bathing? Forest bathing? In the bathing with the forest power, nature power, the kind of thing. So because Japan is a very mountainous country, And then Japan land is itself is not that big, but almost the 60% is the mountain and full of trees and greens and valleys and the bits and pieces. And then also in Japan, there are 4 seasons, very clear 4 seasons. So it is quite common thing for us to enjoy the nature from the beginning of our life starts. So for example, even for the kindergarten kids and the primary school kids, have the opportunities to enjoy the 4 seasons as school activities. And also the kind of a nature thing is quite closely related to the Japanese religion. So worship, the nature is a very common thing for almost all of us. So from the point of view, because forest bathing for us is always coming to our mind in the context of the worship or visiting shrines and temples kind of thing. So in other words, still among the youngsters, it is quite common thing for us to respect the nature, and natural green has a sort of a God there, the kind of a spirit thing. So maybe the forest bathing is a sort of part of the culture. But whereas, for example, in this country, very flat, but the very greenness, very beautiful land here. And then it is a common thing for you to enjoy the green and the natural trust activities and bits and pieces. So perhaps it could be also an interesting topic for us to do some kind of comparative study. So sorry, maybe I am not directly answering your question, but yes, thank you very much. That is a quite interesting point, I think. Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think it's what you say. It should be researched a bit also, because I do think I have lived in the UK for many years, and there is a very special relationship to going, walking. Now I'm in Chile, and in Chile there is a culture also of hiking, but in Peru, some of you might know Lima is in the desert. The poorer areas, I work in poorer areas of Lima, it is surrounded by this desert. There are no green spaces there. So people didn't go out. People cook a lot. But that is, so I wonder if some of these elements are about where we find comfort. And there are different ways of finding comfort. Some of the indigenous young people I work with, they have said that they have now found their beauty in the Andes and where they live, and they have gone away from the city into the Andes. So there you find this kind of element of comfort, being at home and being surrounded by nature. The comfort element might be something, I don't know, I'm not an expert, but I wonder.
Yeah, but that is a very good thing. For example, so recently, some of the urban cities, public sectors, one of their top agenda topics and policies should be the green urban areas, and let's expand the greenery and bits and pieces. But so maybe, so they have already noticed that the green impact on the health and the people's connectedness and the mindfulness, the kind of thing. But at the same time, the kind of thing, sometimes it's quite requires some budget to do that, revitalize the area and green, invest on the green. So everything is in balance, but I think that's a very interesting point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've got another interesting point from Carolyn that's pointed out that you know, how quickly we got used to not having things like cars on the road and planes flying overhead. I still kind of jump when I hear a plane at the moment. Now that we've experienced that, do you think we want to go back to having that loud audioscape that we were used to? For example, church bells that are ringing and things like that.
I think, I mean, there are so many audio people here who will have views on that. I unfortunately, I suspect it's likely that we'll just slip back into it and we won't worry about it anymore. Certainly in terms of things like the sounds of cars, I remember when it was suddenly really surprising to hear cars going by, and now it's just how it always was for me anyway. So I don't know, but perhaps that's something that people need to really cherish and make the space for sound spaces, which we do a lot online, but maybe this is an opportunity to do something like that outdoors as well. I don't know. What do sound people think? I know we've got quite a few here. What do you think, Carolyn?
Hi. Yeah, I think it's returning, but it's not as noisy as it was because there's still not so much traffic on the road. And if you're going to the city, you know, it is much quieter. Yeah, and I think we should relish it and consider that going forward, of some way of controlling it a little bit, I suppose, because we've seen a huge increase in wildlife, for instance. But this is kind of moving away from your technology and technobiophilia, sorry. I'm sitting here with the bells going boom, 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 boom. Yeah.
I suppose it's just possible that we could, having identified that sound and lack of sound and more birdsong and so on, which we've never really identified before because people have never had this experience before. Maybe it's arisen as a new thing that we need to provide for, almost like you have an art gallery. Maybe you could have a similar place for sounds. No, that sounds like a job for the BBC Sound Archive to me.
I think we should have a minute's silence every weekend just for the sake of it.
Interesting.
And thank you, because Radio Lenta, they've shared a blog post with us and a link to their site. So thank you very much. I'm sure people will find that really interesting.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we've been, like probably most sound recorders, we've been recording for 20 or 30 years. I wonder how much lockdown actually allowed people time to hear what was already there and always has been there. I'm not actually convinced that the birds sang louder. It's possible they actually didn't sing as loud. It's just that the anthropogenic noise was less. So I'm not sure, certainly where we are in London, that that nature sort of closed in. I think it's possibly the case, but I don't know, that we actually just tuned into it because we were at home a lot more and we weren't in offices.
And what you're saying about birds singing louder, that rings a bell with me. Didn't somebody write an article about that or suggest that was happening?
Well, just to sort of jump in with my sort of background hat on it, probably was that they weren't calling as loudly because quite a lot of the time they're actually trying to compete with the background noise, so they don't have to try as hard. Although around here the gulls do try their best all the time, especially at 4:30 in the morning. But yeah, I think it was interesting, the fact that we could hear them so clearly. So it definitely made a difference, apart from the gulls. So we've got another question from David Wheeler, saying, is there any research on how well-being from computers compares with that from reality? So for me, being outside, it's about space and wind and varying sunshine and engaging lots of senses, not just any particular sense. And can digital actually ever approach that?
Interesting question, David. Thank you. There is an increasing amount of research into this. And generally, the answer is it compares quite well. And I think one of the reasons, my personal view on this from no research whatsoever, is because we use our imaginations. And that's where I began, I think, with my initial research into metaphors of nature in cyberspace. Where I was thinking about, why is it that we use natural terms to describe things online or in computers or on the internet? And we talk obviously about things like the web, streams of information, the cloud. You can go on and on. There's lots of animal metaphors as well, and spidering, etc. And I think it's because we make this kind of brain cognitive link between the way that we're understanding this particular phenomenon and our existing cultural and memory knowledge of it. And we try and put it together with something so it fits and makes sense to us. So that we think of the internet as a massive net or a web. But of course, it's not actually a real web, but that our knowledge of the natural world is applied to it and so on. So that, I think that's how it happens. And when you're talking about the physical aspects of the feel of the sunshine or the feel of the wind on your skin or whatever, I think that people often add that, so that when you're playing a game in a digital, a video game landscape, which is, say, for example, a forest, you will bring partly your imagination to bear on that and your knowledge of having been in forests in the past, if that makes sense. So no, you're not feeling it on your skin really, but you're kind of, it's like reading a book about a forest and imagining yourself in the forest. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. But at the same time, if we become more used to the digital world, we'll have less reality to link back into. And it's not only about remembering past experiences and applying it to what we're learning now. It's also about new experience.
Yeah.
10 years ago, I had a bad cycling accident and I was not expected to walk without a walking stick again. 18 months later, I found myself on top of, if anybody knows it, Piker Stickle in the Lake District to 2,000+ feet. And I was just like this in the wind. And that was a totally new experience. Yeah. And it's about living real experiences, because I don't think digital can ever match that. So you've got to have that background. And the more we have virtual, are we out in the reality less?
Well, I do think it's a real issue, and congratulations on getting well enough to cycle. It's amazing. But I do think it's an issue. And one of the slides I had to take out of this presentation because it was too long was of virtual balconies on cruise ships. I don't know if you've heard of these, but in the kind of inner cabins in cruise ships now, where normally you have no view whatsoever, quite a few of them now offer a virtual balcony, which is basically, it's showing you, as I understand it, a kind of real-time film of the sea as you're going along through it, but it's not, you're not looking out of a porthole or whatever, it's just showing you something from the ship's cameras, I believe. And some of them have sound as well, real-time sound, which you can turn on or off. And I believe that they also have real curtains that kind of wave around with the wind. I'm not sure if they're actual virtual curtains waving around. They probably are virtual, actually. And I thought, well, that's really exciting and clever. But what if they start to use those in places to keep them sedated? And I go back to what I mentioned in the slides. Can you imagine if they were using those in poor housing? Can you imagine if they were using them in prisons? You know, it suddenly becomes very serious as to how you can sedate people and distract people with the use of that kind of technique. So we have to be careful. I agree with you.
Yeah. Real experience is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, yeah, we need both. That's the point. When I first started doing this research, digital detox was a big thing. And people were saying, you know, you have to turn all your computers off, leave your phone at home and go out and enjoy nature. And I used to think, but hang on, I need my phone because when I'm out, I can take photos of interesting things. I can look things up. I can do plant ID and all that stuff. And anyway, I like my phone. I don't want to give it up. So, you know, I wanted an integrated life. But it was a fight. But you don't hear about digital detox so much these days because people are beginning to understand that we can have both. It's not an either or. We don't need to give up technology in order to enjoy nature. We don't need to give up nature to enjoy technology. We can have both. That's my mantra.
Carolyn, do you want to chip back in with bringing in, because I think what you've said fits quite nicely into this as well, about what it's going to look like in the future to have digital nature.
I should say this is, by the way, in the terms of transparency, this is my sister. And she's an artist and she does amazing stuff with nature in the digital and not in the digital. So
thank you. But Sue and I were talking about this the other day, and I do think it's because you mentioned it at the end of your presentation, Sue, about, you know, what's going to happen next, really. And it's hard to imagine because, like you say, at the beginning, when you first started the research, there was this sort of real divide between going outside to play and getting away from the computer. But that has changed primarily because we will take the computers with us anyway now. So it's just an open question to everybody, really. What could happen? What might happen? Or what do you think would be good to happen, really?
Can I chip in? I would love to see that it's not an either or, that it's complementary, because whilst I can see the power of the lived experience, there's also a power in going remote to Japan and seeing the beauty people can see there, or going back to something you left behind and remembering. It opens up horizons. But Sue, you said something which I think is really important, that it doesn't detach us from the reality and what is going on with nature, what is going on with the planet. If that creates consciousness and that we start to be much more environmental and careful about the environment, then I don't see a harm. And I think it can be really powerful, strong, to have that connectedness, which is being enabled through the technology and digital.
yeah, I think that this is where I am now. There's a lot of work going on amongst people who are trying to do some quite extreme projects, like, you know, if we're sensitive to nature, are there ways in which we can sense the world as if we were a tree sensing the world, or as if we were a mouse? Can we get into that sensory apparatus or have some kind of empathy and so on? So there's people who are, you might say, quite extreme, trying to work in that area. You know, if we don't do it now, whenever will we do it? When the world is collapsing and burning around us? And so I've recently got more and more worried about the fact that for the past few years, I've been focusing on well-being, you know, do this, do that, feel better, slow your heart rate, enjoy being out in nature, enjoy forest bathing and all that kind of thing, which is all great. But actually, at the end of the day, it's very individualistic and very individual focused. So what we really need is an army of all of those people, you know, who are aware, but who are then able to actually work together for the greater good, as Thilo was saying, not just for quote well-being, their own well-being, but for the well-being of everyone in the whole planet. And that's the next step, and that's obviously what David Attenborough was talking about. But can we do it? I don't feel very optimistic. Does anybody here optimistic that they'd like to cheer us up with?
I was just thinking about the most recent nature thing that I saw with the robotic animals, and how, you know, that's using technology, the robotics, to actually get into the communities of the animals. And by learning from that sort of thing, then hopefully we can learn more about how we can do it efficiently and migrate as groups and things like that. But it is, I just thought it was really interesting, literally. I mean, I've been looking up today how birds see, and I wouldn't know that if we didn't have some sort of technology to find that out. So it's all incredibly useful.
I think the other aspect of it as well is accessibility, isn't it?
Yeah.
That, you know, to be able to take a bunch of kids and to somewhere that they are properly immersed in nature is very, very expensive.
Yeah.
You know, that it's, and if you're in an area where you don't necessarily have that immediate access to green spaces and nature and all that sort of thing, then this could be the next best thing, is to introduce these ideas and introduce that to kids, for example, through immersive experiences and things like that, to then perhaps build an interest in wanting to go out and experience everything in real life.
Yes, and I always have a story to tell about that, about my grandson, when we were on Boscombe Beach when he was about 7 or 8. He picked something up and he said, "Oh, I found a flint." And I said, "How do you know it's a flint?" And he said, "Because they have flints in Minecraft." That's where I learned about the qualities of flints. And so we took it to the Hengistbury Head Visitor Centre, and he showed it to them and checked it. And they said, "Yes, that's a flint. It's a worked flint, actually." But he had, just because Minecraft particularly is very careful about making sure that everything has proper physical properties, he learned and he built in Minecraft, and then he had it in his hand. The two go together. But he was lucky to be on a beach.
Can I make a comment here? One of the things that I've discovered over the last 18 months or so is the use of the bird app and the plant ID app. And I think it's great that you can identify bird sounds in your own garden and find out what's around you in nature. And also when you're out on walks, you can identify the birds and you can identify the plants you're seeing. And I think that's absolutely great for all of us, because it connects us so much to our environment and what's around us. And if you can share that with your grandchildren or whoever, it's just a lovely way of, you know, opening up the environment to ourselves and to others.
Yes, thanks for that. I've got a bird app as well, that it'll listen to the bird song and then tell you what. But yeah, and it reminds me, a few years ago in the New Forest, they came up with this idea of a mobile phone creche, like a baby creche. But the idea was that you could go into the New Forest, I think it was in Brockenhurst, and you could lock your phone up in a little creche in the New Forest Ranger's office. And then you would go off into the forest. Well, that would be no good for you, would it? And I did write and ask them what kind of uptake they'd had. And they didn't have many people using it, because for the reason that you've just stated. But that was the digital detox mania period. I think we've passed that now.
But again, you can't take photos and things like that to remind you of it as well. Although, you know, it is all about putting your phone down and actually experiencing rather than just taking photos. But sometimes you want to take a photo as well, just to remind you.
Now that you've brought something to my mind there, that there is a company, I forget what they're called, but they have been a technology company they have been experimenting with something that you put into your arm. I think it's a prosthetic, and it teaches you how to find true north. And while you have this prosthetic, your body learns where true north is. And the idea is that when you've been wearing it for some time, it can then be removed, but your body will remember this ability. It's like an extra sense that you can sense true north. How successful it's going to be, I don't know, but they've been putting a lot of money into it.
That could be learning from birds, because they know where to migrate through magnetic fields.
Yeah.
That's how they do it.
Well, I don't think they use magnetic fields on this one, but I'll check. I'll check.
I was going to say that's all they've done is they've attached a magnet to you.
Yes.
I wanted to raise the issue as well about we talk about real nature and like taking children to a petting farm where they can pet all the animals that never bite them because they're so used to being petted. And maybe we need a virtual equivalent of what animals are really like, so they virtually bite you. Or smell vile or something like that, because we do have a virtual world that we actually accept as being real when it's not, which is a bit worrying, I think.
So I think
if we have a virtual world, are pathways in our brain changing? And if that is so, I would suggest that the bridge between the virtual world and the real world, it'll take us a good 100 years before we're into territory where we can really know what is happening.
Yeah. Okay, so learning to read and write reconfigures your brain. Learning to speak reconfigures your brain. I was listening to a podcast the other day by David Abrams, who's a really interesting philosopher. If you haven't come across him, I really recommend David Abrams. But I didn't agree with him on this occasion, because he did a podcast about GPS, and he was basically saying GPS has completely messed us up. Before GPS, humans found their way around in other ways, and then he started talking about natural sense of direction, etc., etc. And I was listening and I was thinking, wait, maps, you haven't mentioned maps, you haven't mentioned people leaving markers, or even just guides who guide you from one place to another. You know, this whole kind of area of artificial helpers, if you like, he just skipped over them, and he'd gone straight from, you know, wildness in navigating a forest to GPS is a bad thing. But maps.
Yeah, sure. But the bridge that we're crossing now is much, much bigger than that.
Is it though?
Well, I mean, if we're picking up direction finding by whatever means, that's, by the sound of it, creating new pathways within our brain, not as much as reading and talking, etc., etc., but still something that is pretty big. If we're talking about substituting virtual reality for real reality, we're only really at the beginning of that. You know, you can sort of say 20 years or 10 years, but the pace is actually picking up and becoming greater. So where are we going to be in 20, 50, 100 years' time? And how will that mean that our bodies, our brains, our senses have evolved in that time? And I simply think that we're talking about really generations before it becomes established in a fixed way. You know, one of the things I quite often say is that if you map my age, 70 years, with the age of the universe, then the dinosaurs died out 4 months ago. Where are we going to be in 4 months' time, sort of thing? We just, I mean, it's just, the pace of change is incredible compared to how it has been in the past.
Yeah, certainly future shock. But that you implied in that argument that reality was a known baseline. And the trouble is that it isn't, and that nobody knows what's real anyway. And I think what we'll find in your predicted future is, yes, our brains will have been changed by lots of things, but at the same time, the experts will have less and less idea of what reality is. So it might just even itself out.
Yeah, but we don't know.
We've no idea. No.
Can I just, I find it fascinating what we talk about when I'm looking where most people where I am are at in technology. And just a little reminder, in the communities in the Andes, in the rainforests, 10% of the people have a mobile phone. In the communities I work with, in the whole area, there's one refrigerator. People don't have washing machines. And in Lima, a big problem was with COVID that 60% of the population, of the people don't have a refrigerator. And access to technology is really, really small and behind. And so we are talking, sometimes when I hear this, where will we be? I feel like a group of people will be there and a huge other group of people won't be there. And what will that create to that issue you were talking also about, the environment, the consciousness, the globalness? It's rather scary to think how more and more people will be left behind, whilst other people will have this huge access to resources and to technology and will be somewhere else to the vast majority of people. And I find that rather scary.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people, their main concern will be, how do they keep their food fresh, or how do they get the food in the first place?
Yeah.
That rather than what do they do to entertain themselves, and they've actually got it to go into the natural world and deal with that and all the bitey things that there are out there.
Yeah.
So if I'm just going to sort of finish up on this point, there's a lovely sort of point that Helen's made about a positive thing that's come out of her seaside village, that they now have a collective which brings everyone together, and it's not to complain about the tourists, but to welcome them, and everybody congregates on the beach at sunrise and does stuff like yoga and meditation, world swimming and paddle boarding. So doing the well-being stuff collectively. And I think that's probably a really nice note for us to finish on before we go down the doom and gloom road too far.
Thank you, Helen, for that.
So yes, thank you for giving us all something to aspire to. And on that note, can I just say thank you very much to everyone who's joined us this evening, and particularly thank you to Sue and Hiroko for a really interesting evening of discussion. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing some of you either online in the near future, or hopefully seeing some of you in person back in our little Cafe Boscanova. So thanks everyone, and good evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.